In the last lesson, we saw how we can add JavaScript into our HTML page and make something happen using that JavaScript. Now, if you notice that I placed the JavaScript here just before the body is closing. And if you're wondering, there's a number of different places where you can place JavaScript. You can actually place it within your HTML document, so you could have it placed anywhere and it will render out. So you'll see that JavaScript, sometimes it's added to the top of the page, sometimes it's added to the bottom of the page, and this is all depending on how you want to use your JavaScript. So you'll see it if it's added to the top of the page, it's still going to render out the same. If I add it underneath the body, same thing, it'll render out the same. But there is a reason why we're placing JavaScript at the bottom. And this is going to become important when we look deeper into what's available with the DOM, because the DOM is the document object model, and of course I am going to go into this later on in the other upcoming lessons, but essentially for now it's just important to understand that the DOM represents all of that HTML content that's rendered out. So the browser creates the DOM when it reads the HTML file, and it takes a look at all these elements and renders them out in a tree-like fashion where you can traverse through them, and using JavaScript you can access any one of them. And the important thing to note here is that if you've got JavaScript at the top, then it doesn't necessarily have enough time to render out the DOM, and if you're trying to interact with your elements within your HTML page, then it's not going to be able to access them at some times because of the fact that the JavaScript is going to be called after or pre-rendering out the DOM. So this is why typically you're going to see that JavaScript, if you're very DOM heavy, if you're interacting with a lot of the HTML elements, you're going to place the JavaScript at the bottom of the page. And there's a few other reasons as well to do this. If you're linking to an external JavaScript file, if it's taking more time to load, or if there's some issues with it, you don't want your visitors to come to your website and have some kind of JavaScript problems here, loading the external file and then not having the page be able to load. So this is why it's important as well to keep it at the bottom, because this gives the ability to load out all that important content, your HTML content, present it to the user, and then provide that interactivity. And another important note to note about JavaScript is you should keep all of your JavaScript in one place. So when you've decided where you want to place your JavaScript, whether it's in the head or whether it's just before the body closes, so depending on where you want to place it, make sure that you're placing the rest of your JavaScript below that. So if I had some actual on-page script, I would place it just below calling in the library, and then I would add in the script there as well. And this goes the same thing for if you're placing it in the head as well. So placing at the bottom, best practices, and it also helps with the load time as well. So let's now take a look deeper into what we can do with some JavaScript. So we saw that JavaScript, we saw how we can link it to an external JavaScript file, and we saw how we can place it on the web page. We looked at JavaScript syntax. Slightly, we created a simple alert, and this actually runs within the Windows object. So there's the document object and the Windows object, and the window is just as indicated. That's the entire window, and this is something else that gets created when the website loads. And we're going to take a deeper look into the window as well, because it's important to understand all of the different functionality that's available to you. So JavaScript, if you think about it, it's like having a whole bunch of resources ready to go, and JavaScript allows us to make those connections between the resources that are ready to go, make some calculations, some computations, and present it back to the web user. So when you're writing out your JavaScript, we're going to look at how we can add in comments, semicolons, and how white space is treated within JavaScript. So when we are writing out our JavaScript, and let's say we do want to comment out some content, so looking at this alert, and it is always a good idea to document your web development. So when your JavaScript files get really large, and as well as your HTML, sometimes it's a good idea to have some reference points while you're able to read through that code and quickly be able to figure out why you created that. So if I want to comment out this alert or comment this alert, so this is test example and so on. So this will give me a good idea of why I might have created this alert. You just do the two slashes there, and that comments out the rest. So this part here, so anything within this line is part of that commented out area. But if you move to a next line, this is no longer commented out, and we see that we're going to throw an error there for that. But with JavaScript, if you want to comment that out, you can do it that way. And there's also a way to comment out that entire function, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. And there's also a way to make multiple line commenting. So if you had a block of code and you had maybe a bunch of code here for JavaScript, and I will show you how to work with variables later on as well, but if I had some code here that I didn't want rendering out, then we could very easily just comment out that whole section. And you'll see that these commenting outs get used in a number of different ways, and it really does help with web developers because this gives you the ability to communicate back and find out exactly what's happening with your website. So another important thing to note with JavaScript, you notice that every time we've got a JavaScript statement, we're closing it off at the end with a semicolon. So looking at this, every time we've got a new line, and every new line or every command or set of instructions that we want to execute out, so this is going to be all divided by semicolons, and so these are statements and we're dividing them via semicolon, and this helps JavaScript understand that this is something new. So once we've completed it with a semicolon, JavaScript knows that the next line or the next set of content is going to be interpreted as a brand new statement, so a brand new command. And you can create JavaScript without any spacing at all, and it's completely valid, although setting Y this many times, you probably won't see this happening, but this is just an indication of how JavaScript works and how we can set multiple values here. We've also got ability to comma separate these out, and we can set multiple values in that format as well. And spacing, the way that spacing is handled within JavaScript, so I'm going to add that semicolon back in. So we notice that when I type this, over here I don't have a space, it still equals 1. Over here I do have a space. So white space is actually going to be making it more readable, so that's why we're including the spacing here, because this is more readable. But the way that the white space is handled, so it doesn't even matter if we do it this way, that it's still going to render it out as a value of 4. And lastly, the one other thing that I did want to cover off in this lesson is how JavaScript, how we can error check and how we can use our dev tools in order to get more information about what's happening with our JavaScript. So I'm going to open up our editor here, and I'm going to just show you one really nice little trick here with JavaScript. Is we've got communication that we can initiate between our script and not have it actually rendered out for the user's consumption, but this gives us some more information about what's happening with the script. So opening up that web page now, I can use dev tools to find out. So we don't actually see anything happening, but if I go to inspect and I'm on a Windows machine, I'm using Chrome, so a number of all the browsers will have the ability to see the console. So depending on which browser you're using, there's going to be different ways to access the dev tools, and this is why I really like using Chrome, because the dev tools are really easy, straightforward, and there's a whole bunch of information. So if you want to, you can also select anywhere inspect, so Control-Shift-I, or you can go over here to the menu here and you can open up dev tools. So either way, it'll open up this console here, and we see that we've got a number of tabs here at the top, and we've got one called console, and this is where we're actually sending information and messages back. So if we did have something like we've got over here within the JavaScript, and if I wanted to see the value of X and I wanted to see the value of Y, I can console that information out, and I can actually get a better idea of what those values are at that current state within my JavaScript source code. And this is how we use console, and we use it a lot as well for error checking. And we also can see that we've got some HTML errors here. So we see that within the source code here on line 7, we've got spelling mistakes. So we can easily see communication from the console, and we can see how useful it is within our editing process. So now I can update that, refresh it, and within the console, now that error is gone. So the console is an important part of developing websites and allows you to have that communication back and forth and check any kind of issues that you might be having. And we're going to be using console quite a bit to communicate information back and forth from our script out to our web browser. And again, this isn't seen by the users. It's simply used for the development process. So in the next lesson, we're going to dive deeper into what you can do with JavaScript.